I hid a wounded man during a war, and he came back 5 decades later with my song in his memory and the blood still fresh in his words. My name is Juanita Pearl Simmons. I'm 85 years old, and I live alone in an adobe house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm of Native American descent, copper-toned skin, long silver hair that I wear down out of stubbornness and tradition. I'm surrounded by colorful tapestries, memories no one understands, and silences that scream. The war took a lot from me, but it also gave me a secret no one ever knew. Not my sister, not my husband, not even my children. And today, it's time to tell it. I served as a field nurse in Vietnam in 1969, right in the thick of the fighting. I wasn't drafted. I volunteered. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to escape. I wanted to run from whatever was tying me down here. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the suffocating heat of the canvas tents, the stench of burnt flesh mixed with disinfectant, or the muffled screams buried under filthy rags. The days were brutal, treating 40, 50 wounded soldiers a day, making bandages out of whatever we had, learning to breathe between one hemorrhage and the next. I was young, idealistic, still believed I could save the world with gauze and kindness. Now, that feels as far away as the battlefields. The woman who came back from war wasn't the one who left. And what I left hidden in that field, no one ever found. At least not until the day a man, a stranger caked in dust and history, showed up at my door. Nobody recognized him, but he told what only I had lived. This is the real story of this grandmother. A war story that never made it into any book, but still pulses inside me like an open wound. If you've ever felt like there's something inside you that the world would never understand, stay with me till the end. Drop a comment if you've lived something you never had the courage to share. And if this story moves you in any way, subscribe to the channel. This isn't just a video. It's a reckoning with memory. Ever since I came back from the war, I've never known a silence that was truly silent. The wind that slips through the walls of my adobe house carries sounds no one else can hear. Not screams, but whispers. Voices of the wounded, the survivors, the men who vanished without leaving a name. Sometimes I think I'm getting too old to tell what's real anymore. But there are nights when I close my eyes and I'm right back in that field hospital. The real story of this grandmother begins there, between the smell of alcohol and the muffled sound of broken promises. It's not easy growing old when the ghosts walk with you. They don't show up like in the movies, dragging chains or moaning in the dark. They come as memories, a blood-stained sheet, a cry for help that came too late, a secret you swore you'd take to your grave. The hiding place where I kept that man still lives inside me, tucked in the folds of memory that time couldn't erase. The war might have ended out there, but in here, it never did. Some nights, I wake up with my heart racing, like someone just called my name. But it's only the old clock in the living room, ticking through time I no longer know how to count. Back when I was a nurse, I learned to measure life in pulses, not years. And every pulse that slipped through my fingers pulled me closer to despair and closer to courage. The war story I carry isn't made of medals, but of wounds no one sees. Someone once told me that survivors aren't the ones who come out unscathed, but the ones who choose to keep going even while bleeding inside. And it's true. The scars of war aren't on my skin, but in the names I never spoke aloud. Every survivor I cared for, every missing man I watched disappear into the night. They became part of me. And even now, at 85, I still find myself listening for his voice, the one who was never supposed to exist. And yet, he did. I could have told this long ago. Could have written it down, recorded it, left a note, but I was scared of what it would make me relive. Because what happens when a nurse decides to break her silence? When the real story of this grandmother stops being just a whisper in the desert and becomes a confession? Because on that April afternoon, something different knocked at my door. I wasn't expecting visitors that afternoon. The sun was blazing, the air was dry, and the dust danced along the road like it was guarding old secrets. When I heard footsteps approaching the gate, something inside me tightened, like my body recognized what my mind hadn't yet caught up to. He stopped right there, at the entrance, hands stuffed in his pockets, eyes cast down. He had the look of someone who'd seen too much. But what unsettled me was the feeling that I had seen that look before. The neighbors said he was just another drifter, one more lost soul, with no story. One of those wounded by life that folks like to avoid. But I had learned, as a nurse, that the deepest pain doesn't make a sound. And he carried the war on his shoulders. No uniform, no visible scars. It wasn't pity I felt. It was that kind of gut feeling a woman learns to trust after spending too long tending to secrets. There was something in the way he looked at me that made my stomach drop. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a plea. It was recognition. Like he knew exactly where I had been, who I had been with, and what I had done. It reminded me of the moment a survivor opens their eyes after surgery. That quiet second when the soul screams without making a sound. That's what I saw in him. A silence that screamed. During the war, I learned that some people disappear without actually vanishing. Their bodies stay, but their essence, it fades. He looked like one of them. And still, there was a steadiness in the way he stood, like he had come to me with a purpose. Something deep in me, maybe that part that still hears voices, knew he wasn't there by accident. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't his voice that froze me. It was what he said. A detail, a word, a memory not found in any book, any list, any military record. Something only someone who had been there, in that forgotten field hospital, could have known. He said something that made me stop breathing. There was no way that man could have known what he described. No way anyone but me could remember the smell of stagnant blood in that makeshift ward. The suffocating heat laced with the stench of pus and fear. He described it all with eerie precision. The muffled sound of gunfire in the distance, the tremble in my hands as I stitched the torn flesh of a stranger, and the name that never appeared on any chart. It was as if he had lived it with me, or inside me. My first reaction was to deny it. An old reflex, learned when I was young. Back when women like me weren't allowed to remember what we'd seen. As if war only became real once men wrote it down. I shook my head, mumbled that he must be mistaken. But inside, my heart was racing like a wild horse. Not from fear of him, but from fear of myself. Because if what he said was true, then I'd have to remember too. I tried to push him away. Told him I was old, that my memory played tricks on me, that maybe he had mistaken me for another nurse. But the real story of this grandmother is different. It's the story of someone who, in 1969, buried more than bodies. She buried truths. And in that moment I realized this stranger might be the only other survivor of it all. Besides me. The difference was, he looked like he'd come back with a purpose. There are secrets we keep even from God. And that was one of them. I hid a wounded man who was never supposed to cross my path. A man who had disappeared not because someone lost him, but because officially he had never existed. And now, standing right in front of me, was someone who knew, who spoke of things that had been stitched into the torn pages of my war story. This couldn't be a coincidence. He mentioned a detail. The color of the curtain we made from a torn sheet, the way I scrubbed the floor after he nearly drowned in his own blood, and a phrase I whispered, thinking no one had heard. "You are not a mistake." That's what I used to say when I was scared. And right then, at my doorstep, I realized someone else had heard it too. I thought I could keep the past separate from the present, like folding an old blanket and tucking it away at the bottom of a chest. But when he said, "The girl with the turquoise earrings," time unraveled all its folds. That image came rushing back so hard it nearly knocked the breath out of me. Me, 29 years old, hair tied up any old way, trembling hands holding on to a life that was slipping through. The hiding place was behind a bluish curtain, out of sight from the higher-ups. And there, among damp cloths and held breath, the secret was born. The one that aged me before my time. I saw myself in that moment like someone watching a broken mirror. The same frightened eyes, the same shake in my hands, the same voice trying to soothe, even when I didn't believe my own words. It was night, and the base generator had failed again. I remember the smell of kerosene, the weak flashlight casting shadows across his face. He arrived with no name, no explanation, carried in by two men who vanished just as quickly. And me. I should have reported it, but I didn't. My heart told me to act before the rulebook did. Maybe because I saw in his eyes something I carried in mine. The fear of being erased, of becoming just another body no one asked about. He wasn't on our side. Not on the other, either. Not officially. He was a ghost of war, a missing man who didn't belong on any list. And in that moment, my job as a nurse stopped being medical and became something else entirely. Human. I hid a man who was never meant to be found. For years I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. That maybe exhaustion and trauma had conjured that night out of thin air. But he described everything. The faint song playing on the radio, the crooked candle I lit, the bitter taste of the antibiotic I forced down his throat. No file holds that kind of memory. Only the heart does. Only those who lived it feel it. And when he looked at me, I knew. The emotional story I've tried so hard to forget is exactly the one he never let go of. But the most unsettling part was still to come. For a long time I searched for that name in lists that didn't exist. I went over every chart from that time in my mind, every record of who came and went, every dog tag we catalogued under pressure and dust. But he was nowhere. Not listed as wounded, not as a prisoner, not as a deserter. It was like he'd never been there at all. Like he was a hallucination, born from the exhaustion of war and the fear of being forgotten myself. But I remembered him. The smell of his dirty clothes, the crooked tattoo hidden beneath his collarbone, the way he looked at me when the pain hit hard. He didn't talk much, but it was like his presence filled every corner of that makeshift hiding place. I was the only one who heard him, who touched him, who believed he was worth saving. And maybe that's why I was also the one who condemned him to silence, because I never let anyone else see him. At first, I thought I'd dreamed it all, that my exhausted mind had made up a survivor with no past. But when that man came back, decades later, and started describing, in detail, things only I could have known, the fog lifted. He had existed. He still did. And there he was, standing in front of me. Older, wearier, but still whole. An echo of the war story I had buried so carefully. You have to understand. In war, sometimes the thing that saves also wounds. I saved him from death, but I pushed him into oblivion. The hiding place kept him from being executed, but it also erased who he was. It was a high price, but I chose to pay it. For him and for me. Because back then, All I wanted was to disappear, too. And helping him was my way of doing that without actually dying. I thought I had made it all up, that he was just a reflection of what I wished I could have done for so many others. But he came back to prove me wrong. On that stifling night, when the world felt like it was about to collapse on top of us, he made me a request, not with words. It was in his eyes, in the way he grabbed my wrist, firm, but not aggressive, like someone holding on to their last chance of being remembered by anyone. I understood without him saying a thing, and I made a promise. I swore I'd keep that secret like someone burying a still beating heart. It wasn't a solemn vow. There was no altar, no witnesses. Just me, him, and the muffled sound of planes overhead. I told him I'd erase his existence if that's what it took to keep him alive. That if anyone asked, I'd say that night never happened. Because war doesn't leave room for nuance. You're either a hero or a traitor. And he was both, wounded from every side, including from within. A missing man inside his own uniform. I knew the risk. That hiding place wasn't just physical protection. It was a moral abyss. If anyone found out, I'd lose everything. My rank, my respect, my freedom. But in that moment, I wasn't a nurse. I was human. And I saw in him something that went beyond any military code. He was just another young man trying to survive a war that had already condemned him before it even began. Like so many others I treated, who never made it back. He never told me what he had done, and I never asked. Sometimes not knowing is the only way you can keep caring. I learned that too, somewhere between whispered prayers and worn-out syringes. Some secrets save lives, until they become burdens. And for decades, I carried that weight alone. I never shared it with anyone. Not with the other nurses. Not with my family. This was the real story of this grandmother, stitched together in silence. And now, decades later, he'd come back to collect on that promise. He stood in the middle of the room, hands trembling, face pale. And when he began to unbutton his shirt, my body reacted before my mind did. A chill ran straight down my spine, like every cell in me recognized what my eyes hadn't yet seen. And there it was, on his left shoulder, between the wrinkles of time and sharp bones. The proof. A poorly done tattoo, crooked, almost faded. But I remembered it like I'd seen it just yesterday. That night during the war, I was the one who cleaned that wounded skin, who pressed gauze to it and whispered that he had to hold on. The tattoo was small, hidden beneath layers of grime, and it showed a tribal symbol I never really understood. Back then I thought it was just another mark scribbled by a bored soldier. But now, all these years later, there it was, a silent witness to a secret that time couldn't erase. A war mark, a survival mark. I felt the ground vanish beneath me. Like every truth I had built to protect myself crumbled all at once. It couldn't be him. And yet, it had to be. The war story I had tried to bury was standing right in front of me, flesh and bone, with the same downcast eyes, the same slow breath, and now, the same tattoo. There was no more doubt. The wounded man I hid, the nameless missing soul, had come back. We like to think time erases everything, but the body remembers. The body carries every scar, every stitch, every touch. And that tattoo was more than ink on skin. It was a signal, a way of saying, "I'm still here." As he pulled his shirt back on, my eyes welled up. Not because I was sad, but because I finally understood that none of it had been imagined. It had been real. All of it. And that's when everything around me began to spin. It wasn't just compassion. It wasn't just nurse's instinct or fear of seeing another nameless body tossed onto a pile. I hid him because In that face covered in blood and dust, I saw a part of myself I had spent a lifetime denying. Something ancestral deep that made me tremble. He had features that mirrored my native roots, the ones I learned to hide just to survive. And maybe, in saving him, I was trying to save what was still left of me. I was taught to blend in, to lighten my skin with rice powder, to tuck my beaded necklaces under my uniform, to hold my tongue when they said, "Indians don't belong here." And for years I did just that. But when I looked at that unconscious man, and later when he opened his eyes, I saw in them the same exhaustion I felt from constantly pretending I didn't exist. We were both invisible on that battlefield. It was like the world had shoved us to the margins of history. Him, a soldier with no country. Me, a nurse whose name never made it into any book. And there we were, in the middle of chaos, stitching into each other the fragments of a life the world refused to acknowledge. The hiding place where I kept him silent was the same place I had buried my own identity for years. And maybe that's why I never shared this part of the story with anyone. Because saying it out loud hurt more than remembering it. A lot of people think the worst wounds come from bullets. But words, or the absence of them, bleed too. The silence about who we are makes us sick in ways no one ever teaches us how to treat. I became a nurse to heal others, but I realized too late that I was also the patient. And that moment, that choice to keep him alive and hidden, was my way of telling myself, you deserve to keep going too. And invisible we remained. Until that day, he carried an old piece of paper in his pocket, folded 7 times, nearly falling apart at the edges, yellowed by time and the sweat of sleepless years. When he handed me that scrap, his hands trembled like he was giving away a piece of his own heart. I unfolded it carefully, and what I read made me understand the weight he had been carrying. It was a confession. But it wasn't just about desertion. It was about what he had seen, what he let happen, and what he had never been able to stop. The words were simple, almost childlike, scribbled in a hurry. He wrote about faces, places, names that meant nothing to most. But to me, they pulsed. I remembered the eyes of some of those men, their voices, their smiles before they vanished. The real story of this grandmother now held his sins too, which, for reasons I may never fully understand, he chose to share with me. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just silence, and then remembrance. At the end of the letter there was a request, not for himself but for those who would come after. A nearly childlike wish, that someone would know he tried, that even though he ran, he never forgot, that every wounded man he watched die without stepping in haunted him like a shadow. And that cut me deeper than any scalpel ever could, because I knew that kind of pain, the guilt you can't explain, the regret that has no witness. A lot of people think deserters are cowards, but few know the kind of courage it takes to wear the label of traitor and keep walking anyway. And he walked, carried that paper for decades, folded, hidden, waiting for the day someone would read it. Someone who would understand. Someone like me. A war survivor who also knew what it was like not to be able to tell the whole story. Not for lack of words, but from too much pain. The truth weighed more than any wound. He started speaking like someone dreaming out loud. At first hesitant, then more sure, as if searching my eyes for permission to go on. He mentioned details only someone who had lived beside me could know. Things even the war records never held on to. The whispered words between nurses when we were hiding someone. The hiding spot behind the chapel altar, where we kept more than just medicine. We kept lives that weren't allowed to exist on paper. He described the song I used to sing to the dying, a native melody my grandmother taught me. one I only sang on nights of utter despair, when not even morphine could dull the pain. No other soldier knew that. Not even the other nurses, who were too busy trying to hold the chaos together around us. But he remembered. Not just the melody, but the way my voice sounded when I sang it that night. He talked about how I wrapped the soldiers' feet before tying their laces, how I always smelled my coffee before sipping it, a habit from childhood I never broke. He knew too much. And each one of those memories pulled me back into that makeshift hospital, sweaty, suffocating, where every day was half a miracle. The emotional story he carried inside him was the same one I had kept buried in my chest for over 50 years. I tried to find an error, a slip, any sign he might be lying, but there wasn't one. He knew too many things. Small things. Private things no one could pretend to know. It was him. The man I hid. The survivor who vanished. The nameless wounded. And now he had come back to remind me of something I tried to bury with the bodies. That nothing we live in silence ever truly dies. He wasn't an imposter. It was him. The man I saved. And silenced. For years it ate away at me. How can someone live without a name? No records, no origin, as if they were made of air. But now I understood. He never said his real name because that name was a death sentence. Back then, all it took was being in the wrong place, wearing the wrong uniform, or saying the wrong word. And that was it. A name could be a weapon pointed straight at your chest, and he knew that better than anyone. If he had told who he really was, he would have been executed as a traitor. Maybe tortured, maybe used as a bargaining chip. War plays by cruel rules. Sometimes silence is worth more than 1,000 truths. And I, as a nurse, learned that sometimes caring isn't about healing. It's about protecting, even from the truth itself. The hiding place I gave him was a shield. But the silence he chose to carry was the cost of staying alive. The whole time I kept him hidden. I never called him by any name. It was always boy, son, you. He understood. And I did too. In war, names get torn up like scraps of paper. What matters is keeping the body breathing, the blood flowing, and hope alive just long enough to make it through another day. And maybe that's why his face never left my mind. Because he was the only one without a name. But not without a soul. Now, standing in front of me, he didn't want to hide anymore. He said he was tired, that he wanted the world to know. Not his real name, but the story he lived. That someone, at least, would call him something more than missing. And he chose my voice to do it. The voice of the woman who once defied orders to save him. The real story of this grandmother had become his last chance at redemption. And now, he wanted the world to know, if only through my voice. I was never a mother. At least, not in the way most people understand it. The war took that from me before I ever had the chance to dream of a family. But my arms, they cradled more wounded men than I can count. And that day, when he gripped my hand tightly and said, "Thank you, Mom," I felt something shift. It wasn't a mistake. It was recognition. That, for a brief and brutal moment, I was all he had. I remember the way he held my hand. Not like a grown man, but like a child finally finding shelter. And in that instant, my age disappeared. Time folded in on itself, and we were back in that dark little room where I hid more than a wounded body. I hid a boy, lost in a world that wanted to bury him alive, and he knew. He knew it was me who changed his bandages, who shared half my rations, who sang him to sleep when the bombs didn't stop. I don't know if anyone ever called him son. I don't know if he had a family waiting for him. But for those few days in the shadows, I was home. And he was a reminder of everything I could have had, and never did. The war story we lived together isn't in any history book. It's between the lines. It's in the way two broken people found comfort in each other. And even if the world never understands it, we did. That word, Mom, disarmed me more than any firearm ever could. It made me cry in a way I hadn't since the war ended. And I understood that being a mother goes beyond blood, beyond childbirth, beyond names in a registry. Sometimes being a mother is about being there, being quiet care, being love in a world that only knows how to abandon. And as strange as it may sound, I accepted it. I accepted that to him. I was that, even if only for a little while. But my soul wouldn't rest if I didn't tell what really happened. After that visit, he vanished, as if he had come only to deliver one last breath from the past, and then dissolve once more into time. I searched for him, in shelters, hospitals, along the dusty streets of Santa Fe. I called volunteers I knew, quietly described a man with no name, no clear age, no identity. No one had seen him. No one recognized him. It was as if he'd never been there at all, like a breath of sand carried off by the wind. It felt just like the first time I watched him leave, that night I hid him in the infirmary. A silence that doesn't weigh you down, but whispers from within, reminding you something precious has slipped away. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper. A kind of longing that doesn't ask for return, only acknowledgement. Because what we lived was real, even without witnesses, even without photographs. It was a war story hand-stitched in secret, hidden between adobe walls and buried memories. I kept his letter, with its shaky words written in fading pen, with the smell of old paper, with the promise I never needed to hear out loud. It felt like he had come back only to say goodbye. Truly, this time. Like his mission was to remind me that the past doesn't die. It just changes shape. And sometimes it comes dressed as an old man, with tired eyes and a confession in his pocket. And then it disappears again. With time, I came to accept that maybe he came to set me free. Like a silent debt only those who've kept secrets can understand. The nameless wounded man, the undocumented survivor, the missing soul I once hid, now hidden again, in words. Because somehow, I knew this was my last chance to give a voice to someone who never had a face. To finally tell the real story of this grandmother, without fear of what people might think. And deep in my soul, I knew it was finally my turn to speak. I was taught to stay quiet. Since I was a little girl, I was told women speak softly. Women don't interfere. Women don't survive war. They only survive what's left of it. When I came back, I was no longer the same. And even so, I swallowed the memories like bitter medicine. The kind that promises to heal, but only makes you sicker. I never spoke of the wounded man I hid. Never told anyone that the most important story of my life had no witnesses. Only whispers. They also taught me that being native was something to keep contained. That our pain didn't belong in the pages of history. That our presence in the trenches was a mistake time would try to erase. And I let it happen. I wore silence like a freshly pressed nurse's coat, with resignation and discipline. But inside my heart beat out of rhythm, because hiding that man also meant hiding a part of myself that had been begging to be seen. The years went by. I watched other women speak, write books, receive medals. I watched from a distance, proud and jealous, because I had survived too. I had disobeyed orders in the name of life. I had held the hand of someone the world wanted erased. But I lacked the courage to be judged, to be called a traitor, to be told my care meant nothing because it was given to someone who didn't deserve it. The truth is, silence was my shield. But it was also my prison. I stayed quiet because I didn't know if the world was ready to listen, if my family would understand, if my grandchildren would still look at me with love. And if you're hearing me now, it's because some part of me finally decided that hiding this story was the greater mistake. That keeping the secret of a disappeared man is like disappearing with him. But after his visit, I understood that silence, too, can be an act of cowardice. You saved me, but you saved yourself that day, too. Those were the last words I ever heard from him. Not spoken as thanks, but as revelation, as if he were finally handing me the key to a riddle kept locked for decades. I froze. That sentence hung in the air like an unspoken promise, like an echo that keeps going long after the sound fades. I had saved him, yes, but I had never realized that in doing so, I had also saved myself. After he left that second time, something shifted inside me. It wasn't peace, exactly. It was clarity. I understood then that I hadn't been just a nurse in a war story. I had been a hiding place, a refuge, a voice for a survivor who didn't fit inside the official version of history. And by protecting him, I reclaimed parts of myself the war had tried to crush. My humanity, my ancestry, my right to feel, and to remember. The war taught all of us how to forget. But forgetting is not the same as healing. His words were like a needle stitching back what had once been torn. And from that day forward, I started speaking out loud in my own home. I started singing that song again, without fear of who might hear it. I started looking in the mirror and seeing not just the 85-year-old woman, but the young girl who once chose to protect someone in silence. His memory stays with me, not as a burden, but as a compass. A reminder that not all salvation is visible, that not all the missing are lost, that there are secrets which, when spoken at the right moment, free us more than they imprison us. I still don't know if he was real, or a ghost that time sent back to me. But what we lived was truer than anything I was ever taught about loyalty. And that's why today, after all these years, I'm here, ready to say what I never had the courage to speak out loud. Now that you've heard all this, tell me, how many times have you swallowed your own story, out of fear no one would understand? How many wounded have you hidden inside yourself over the years, waiting for someone to come back just to say, I remember what you did? Maybe you've never lived through a war with bombs and gunfire. But if you've ever carried a secret too heavy to share, then you're a survivor too. I stayed silent for over half a century. I thought I was protecting others. But really, I was running from myself. And maybe you're holding something in too. Something that needs to be set free. What would happen if you told your truth? Even through trembling lips. Even if no one understood. Because sometimes it takes courage to remember, but even more courage to speak. Now I want to know, what if it were you? Would you have hidden that man too? Would you have kept that secret? Leave your comment down below. Tell me what this story stirred in you. Maybe your words will help another woman feel less alone. And if you want to keep hearing emotional war stories, told by someone who lived it all as a nurse on the battlefield, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. I still have so much to say, and you'll want to be here to listen.